Welcome back to Mac's Garage. As always, if you like what you see here, hit the like, share, subscribe, all those things. They help me out, get me out in the algorithm so more people can see this stuff. So today I am standing here with this Nissan Xterra, and it came in with a transmission issue. Now I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit and show you how I determined that it is not a transmission issue and kind of run down what's actually going on. I am going to kind of go through some stuff. I already started working on this. I don't make videos for every vehicle I work on. This happened to be a pretty good case that I think will make a decent video, so I'm starting it off a little bit late. Sometimes I know they're going to be good and I just start videotaping right away, and sometimes I'm not really sure what's going on and I don't really think it's going to be, but then once I get into it, it turns out it is. This is one of those cases. So it came in with drivability, transmission shifting issues, engine revs up, doesn't want to shift, won't stay in high gears. In fact, the claim was that it will not hit top gear or overdrive, and it just revs up and doesn't really want to do anything, and then it starts to get hot as well. So the assumption was that there was something going on in the transmission causing all of this stuff to happen. So here's the backstory on this Xterra a little bit. The owners just left California. They moved out of California. Now, a fun thing that I didn't realize about California is so many people are trying to leave that you can't rent a U-Haul in California to leave the state. Or you can, but it is incredibly expensive to the point where people don't do it. And the reason for that is all the U-Hauls are leaving as there's the mass exodus of California. But that ends up with this Xterra, which has a lift, some 35s, towing a decent sized trailer, and I didn't actually see the trailer, so I don't know what size it is, but it was a large enough trailer to move a fair amount of household items. As they were coming out of California, they made it to, I believe they said, Nevada. In Nevada, it developed or maybe before that, it developed a misfire. At that point, a shop in Nevada put a coil in it, and that supposedly fixed the misfire. After the shop in Nevada, they continued on. They also changed the transmission fluid, and that comes in here in a little bit. They also changed the transmission fluid because it was dark and smelled kind of bad, which I guess that kind of happens over time. So they did a coil, changed the transmission fluid and filter. They went back onto the road with it, and they made it to somewhere in the Texas region before it started having problems and misfires and all that stuff, to the point where it didn't really continue on. They stopped driving this. In Texas, they were able to rent a U-Haul and a trailer to travel the rest of the way here because people aren't mass exodusing Texas. So that gave them a spot where they got the U-Haul, they got this. I'm not familiar with 100% of the story, but I'm trying to relay it back the best I can. And why am I telling you this? Because it does come into play. Now I've talked to the owner again, and since having this done, all 6 of the coils have been replaced somewhere here locally, trying to chase a random cylinder misfire. At least that's what I assume was going on. They replaced all of the coils. So, yeah. Now, the reason that comes into play, I talked to the owner and was informed that it was driver's side ignition coils that were replaced back in Nevada or New Mexico or something. It doesn't really matter. Wherever they got changed first, it was on the driver's side. Now I'm just trying to paint the big picture here. So if you're a car guy and you're trying to start lining stuff up, maybe you're starting to see the issue. So let's bring it in, the first checks that I did. Okay? Okay, so this shows up at the shop. First thing I'm going to do with a suspected transmission issue is I'm going to check the fluid. So this one has kind of a weird deal on it. It's got a little bolt on it. It does have a dipstick. Before I even drove it, this is what I did. I didn't even have the car running. Long bolt, longer than I thought. Hold on. All right, so you get the bolt out. First inspection I do is I just kind of give it a good visual. Now the vehicle was at operating temperature at that point, so the first thing that I did is I checked the transmission fluid, and I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but it's nice pink, smells good, is higher than where it says its operating range is, which is good because the vehicle is shut off. When we start it up and that level drops down, it should be pretty appropriate at that point. Beyond that, that was step one, because we've got a suspected transmission shifting and possible overheating issue. Now that good pink fluid tells me that this is probably not roaching the transmission fluid and building a ton of heat in the transmission. Now, I know it didn't drive a super long distance after this fluid was changed, and that's fine. If it was building a ton of heat in the transmission, it would still just blacken that fluid almost instantly. Okay, step two here. I grabbed my handy dandy scan tool, and I'm not sure how well this screen actually shows up. It's digital screen, digital camera. I think that sometimes they don't quite work together real well. But the next thing I did was I checked for codes, and I actually started in the transmission, and there were no codes in the transmission itself. When I first tried to scan the engine, it would not communicate with the scan tool. And I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, because it has functioned properly every time since. So, and there's going to be a ton of codes in here because I've been messing with stuff. So it should have a lot of them. Yup. So we've got lots of codes that I have set a pretty strong number of. Now, when I first scanned it, it did have two codes. It had the random cylinder misfire, which we already knew was there as well, or at least that was attempted to be fixed earlier. And then the second one here was this P0420, and that is a catalyst efficiency bank 1. Now, I'm in Michigan, and honestly, on a 15-year-old car with, 150,000 miles on it, that catalyst efficiency, we normally just kind of ignore it and the light stays on because we don't have emissions testing. If you're in a place that's required to do that, then you need to figure out if it is a actual cat issue or a oxygen sensor problem or something else going on. But those were the two codes that I had so far, and I still had not driven the car yet at this point. After that, what I did is I went into the transmission section here, pulled up some data, transdata 2. Okay, so right now, and this actually kind of confirms that this sensor stuff is working because this is about the temperature of the shop. So I've got ATF temperature 1, ATF temperature 2. I've got 66 and 71 degrees. Those are not far enough apart to really concern me. They're only 5 degrees apart. That's close enough. And they are pretty much where they're at. So along with that, I can also see the commanded gear. So right now, commanded gear although it's not actually in any gear whatsoever, is first gear. So on my test drive, what I did is I loaded up my Transdata first. I checked out the temperature before I left. So the temperature was running at about 140 degrees, which is well within the range of what's possible. Now I'm talking on this thing and I can't find what I'm looking for. So I checked out the temperature, and then I watched the commanded gear. So as I drove this thing, I watched the commanded gear. Commanded gear was first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It went through all of those gears. When it hit fifth gear, actually fourth was about the same. I very gently got it up into fourth and then fifth gear, and it was very soft on the engagement. You couldn't hardly tell that it actually shifted, and it just didn't really have any power whatsoever. So I got back up to the temperature. The temperature was staying steady. The commanded gear actually dropped down to third, at which point we switched out of, at which point I switched it out of transmission because now I wanted to watch the engine. Okay, so there are 3 different sections for engine, so I'm just going to tell you kind of what I was looking at. I started looking at the temperature for one thing, which we were mid gauge, which is not anywhere near the H, but it was dead center of the gauge. That was 230 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's my engine coolant temperature, and the engine coolant is right between the 2 transmission ones. So 3 different temperature sensors. They're all close enough that it's fine. So I checked out the temperature because I wanted to know where I was at. 230 degrees is too hot. Okay. So the next thing I looked at was I don't remember. Mass airflow, I think. If you let the thing idle and then get into the throttle, the mass airflow would go up and then slowly pull down. So where's this going? I'm getting there. After the initial test drive, I've confirmed a couple of things. One, it has a problem. Something is definitely wrong with this vehicle. 2, the transmission appears to be doing what it is commanded to do by the PCM. So when I feel it command different gears, it feels like it's shifting. Although 4th and 5th were pretty soft, I did play with the shifter and make it manually shift up and down, and you could pretty clearly feel differences at that point. So if the transmission seems to be doing what it's supposed to, the thing revs way out and it just can't really gain speed. Now it's starting to overheat. We have an engine performance issue. The mass airflow data, where if you let it idle and sit and be easy and whatever, and then step on it, the fact that the mass airflow would ramp up and then taper off kind of leads us to a flow issue in the engine. So if you had a, say, very restricted, maybe a mouse built a nest in your air box, it may have enough airspace that when you first step on it, it pulls the air in and then it runs out of air volume. The other thing, and where I'm kind of going with this one, is that it could point to a clogged exhaust. So as it's sat and been able to expel the gases out at an idle, the exhaust system is clear and easy to run through. When you then step on the gas, I shouldn't say it's clear and easy to run through. The exhaust gases make their way out of the engine even if the exhaust is restricted, as long as it's not 100% clogged. As you step on the gas, the engine takes in more air, burns more air and fuel, and now has to get rid of more air and fuel. So if the exhaust is restricted and it can't get the air out, it starts to back up into the engine. That tends to cause overheating, because all of that hot exhaust gas that is supposed to go out the tailpipe and get rid of the heat is stuck in the engine. So that's where I was headed with this one, and here's the next test. And you can kind of see through here, I'm in the fender well. I removed the fender liner. This hole right here is where the oxygen sensor goes in. So in order to test for an exhaust restriction, all I did is removed the upstream exhaust sensor. So we've got oxygen sensor, not exhaust sensor. So our exhaust manifold is right here. Our catalytic converter is right there. This is the upstream O2. I pulled it out of both sides of the engine, so both sides are clear. I'll fire this thing up so you can hear how ridiculously loud it is in here. So with both oxygen sensors, upstream oxygen sensors removed, which you can run it a little while like that, but not for a real long time. With both oxygen sensors removed, I took it for another ride. So on this drive with both oxygen sensors removed, it went through all 5 gears in a way that was very noticeable, and it was able to get up to 60 mile an hour, which I couldn't do the first test drive. I didn't really tell you that, but I got up to like 50 and that was it. So I got up to 60 mile an hour, no problem. I put it right to the floor. I revved this thing out. From a dead stop, it wide open shifts at 5,800 RPM. It pulled right through to that and did perfectly fine with that. Also something it would not physically do. It would not physically rev high enough to shift on the floor the first time. So with the oxygen sensors out, it runs quite well. Now in the beginning of the video, and I haven't actually tested this, and I need to kick this car out and get working on other stuff that I have scheduled, so it'll be a little while before I finish this video. But in the conversation with the owner after I've done this stuff, I found out that it was the driver's bank that the coils were initially replaced on. As of right now, I have come to the hypothesis, and we'll figure this out later, that the catalytic converters on the driver's side are likely clogged. Now, part of it is the coils were on that side. The other thing is when I pulled the oxygen sensors out after sitting for the same amount of time, the driver's side or the passenger side oxygen sensor was warm. The driver's side oxygen sensor was hot, like uncomfortable to touch, hot. I left this thing sit and cool down to the point where I figured it should be pretty nice to handle those. The passenger side wasn't bad. Driver's side still super hot, which means that that side was hotter. Now when a catalytic converter fails, they get super hot. I did not see it glowing cherry red, which is something they will actually do sometimes, but it was hotter. Now, there was a pretty bad rattle going on, and after that first test drive, that was when I got back from the first test drive, I assumed that there was a catalytic converter that the substrate inside had broken apart and was rattling violently. Don't actually think that's what it is anymore. It turns out it was a heat shield that was rattling on the exhaust, but that's where my head was at. That's where I thought it was at after that first initial test drive. The O2's being pulled out and the thing, it ran cool as well. The engine temperature never got above like 205. So it was significantly cooler running, significantly better power. Everything is just happier with the world. So the next move here is we're going to install the oxygen sensor back into the passenger side, leave the driver's side out, and we'll test drive it one more time. Alright, so we're just going to slide the O2 sensor back in. I've got a light touch of anti-seize on there. Make sure if you put anti-seize on it, you do not get it on the tip. threads are okay. This thing being from California is absolutely fantastic to work on. So that one's installed. Should be good to go. We're gonna go ahead, fire this thing up, take it for a ride. Okay, so we got this thing more or less up to temperature. I am just gonna drive it here with the 102 pulled, and there's second. That's on the floor, so that's not good. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but the check engine light is flashing, which means misfires, and just running generally like garbage. So I'm going to go back and switch which oxygen sensor is in. Okay, so this time I've now got both sensors out, which honestly, as terrible as it was, the last run was an improvement because it didn't overheat. It stayed down at normal temperature. But I've got both sensors out. I'm going to run it this way for a minute, and then I'll put the other sensor back in for the way back to the shop and see what it does. Played with the throttle a little bit, does everything it needs to do. Okay, so I pulled out to full throttle shift. It's cruising with traffic, which they're all turning in front of me, so I'll have to slow down. But we're going to throw the driver's side sensor in real quick when I stop to turn around and see what it does. Okay, so there we go. That is the driver's side sensor is in, passenger side is out. It's got a nice 55-mile-an-hour cruise. Slow down a little bit and really give her some throttle. Yep, blasted right up through that 5600 RPM shift point. So we have an obstruction in the cats on the passenger side. All right. So from that test drive, you now see why we don't just make assumptions. I thought it was going to be the driver's side cat because of heat. That's what side the owner told me the misfire was on, which was not actually right. It was cylinder number 5. The way that this Nissan is numbered, 135 is on the passenger side, 246 is on the driver's side. So a cylinder 5 misfire would be on the passenger side. Now, kind of the idea behind a catalytic converter is catalytic converters don't die, they are killed. So in this case, they were towing a trailer with what I assume was a fairly bad misfire on the passenger side or right-hand bank of the vehicle. So what that will do is, a misfire is bad on its own, but then you add in the extra heat and load of towing, and it overheats those cats and causes them to melt down. So I now have, as I'm standing here, I loosened the bolts on everything. I haven't pulled the catalytic converters out yet. What I'm guessing we're going to see is that the forward cat, the one closest to the engine, will be totally melted down and nasty. The back cat, I'm like 50-50 on whether or not that looks bad. So having done the testing that we have done so far, I went ahead and ordered both catalytic converters and both O2 sensors along with gaskets and hardware for this side. Now I went directly to the OEM manufacturer, Nissan, picked up the forward cat. They did not have the rear cat in stock, so I got the forward cat, all the gaskets, fasteners, stuff like that, right from Nissan directly. And then the rear cat, I had to buy from another source. I went with a MagnaFlow. Kind of the rule on cats is the real cheap ones are real cheap, and you end up with check engine lights and stuff like that. So in this case, the OEM cat was actually like $25 less than the aftermarket cat I probably would have gone with. So it totally made sense to go OEM on it. Now, could you get a really cheap cat for it? Sure, but you're just kind of asking for problems at that point, at least in my opinion. Probably some of you out there run cheap aftermarket cats and not had issues, but that was what I decided to do here. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull these catalytic converters out, and we'll show them to you on the camera. Chunkage. I don't know if you can hear that from there, but there's rattling inside this one. Alright. And this one is totally melted down. Alright, let's see what we got here. So you should be able to see right through there now. There's chunks inside of here that would land sideways and cause this to clog up, but this catalytic converter is completely destroyed. Now the chunk action inside of this one, couple of things. One, all the stuff that came out of the forward cat landed in this backward cat or the rear cat. So we are going to replace it as well, because everything that went down through the exhaust system probably got clogged up in here. Plus it is rattling too, so I don't know if that's stuff from the forward cat or if it started to break up as well. The O2 sensors, we're going to change those for two reasons. One, they are like theoretically a 60,000 mile to 100,000 mile maintenance item. And two, they got super hot just like everything else on this side. So we're going to go ahead, put two new cats, two new O2 sensors back together, and these cats are actually not worth anything in a scrapyard too, if that's what you're wondering, because there's nothing left inside of them of value. So by comparison, from that totally like Chernobyled out cat, if I shine a light down through this, well, you can't even see it. Alright, I expected to be able to kind of see it, but you can't. So if I shine my light down through there, you might see like a faint glow through the end. Oh yeah, if I angle it just right, which I'm having trouble getting, but there's just, you can see the light through the honeycomb, but it's not like the other one where everything's melted down and nasty. So I've got everything pretty well laid out. I had to make a quick trip to the hardware store, but I think everything's good to go now. So I am going to go ahead and throw this back together. Enough of the high speed whatever watching me work on that thing. I've got to tighten everything down, throw some O2 sensors in, and put an exhaust heat shield back on. And then we'll fire up the camera and take a ride. The exhaust is all buttoned up. We're going to get in this thing, take it for a quick rip, and I'm pretty confident it's going to be alright. I may suggest an oil change because I know this engine's gotten fairly warm a couple of times, and I've got some splash shields and stuff to finish up, but this will be verifying the repair right here. Okay, here we go. Oops. So far so good. Getting up to speed like normal. Temperature staying good. Cruising at 60 mile an hour with no problems. I mean, there's a little bit of shake and whatnot, but that's because this road is terrible. And yeah, I don't really know anything about the tires, but they've sat in one spot for a while. Okay. So it's maintaining speed, no problem. One final test here. We're gonna floor it, see how it RPMs, make sure it does what it needs to do. I know that sounds like kind of an abusive thing to do, but I've definitely almost missed issues on cars that I caught when I put them to the floor. So slow down a little bit so it can catch a lower gear. Okay, on the rug, 4,000, 5,000, 55, and 6,000. That's better than it did with the O2 sensors out. So it's making more power than it was then. Alright, I think that's about enough for the test ride. That test drive seemed to be a success. Let's kind of recap what we did here. Step one, verify customer concern. The customer concern was transmission shifting problem, possibly blown transmission. I see where they were coming at from that perspective. It was revving out, it was overheating, it was doing a lot of things that may kind of lead you to think that the transmission's not shifting right. However, in this case, it turned out to be an engine performance issue. Step two was our diagnostics, and I did a real simple deal and kind of started that before I started the camera. So I went through the scan tool data. We had a catalyst efficiency of random cylinder misfire. When I test drove it, the mass airflow sensor did some stuff that's consistent with an obstruction. It started out to rise like normal for its flow rate, and then it kind of came back down and leveled out. That's usually a restriction on one side or the other. This one happened to be the exhaust. We tested that by pulling the O2 sensors before the cats. It allowed it to run quite well. Based on what I did and what I had talked to the customer about, I made some assumptions that it was going to be the driver's side, which it did not turn out to be that. Cylinder 5, which is what the customer was talking about, is on the passenger side. And the reason that the cat seemed hotter on the driver's side is because there's way more stuff to burn yourself on when getting to the O2 sensor. The passenger side is pretty wide open. I figured that out when I was swapping sensors back and forth, and doing the passenger side is not a real big deal. Doing the driver's side, I burnt myself a couple of times. So I thought the cats were hotter on the driver's side, but that was really probably just a placebo effect of, well, I couldn't quite get the cats in. Or maybe it's because there was still material left in the cats on the driver's side, while the passenger side had just enough to jam sideways and clog it. Either way. So that's why we do diagnostics, figured out what was going on there. Like I said earlier in the video, cats don't die, they get killed. So you can get coolant in them, which kills them. You can have too much fuel, which causes them to overheat and burn down, which is what this one did. That was caused by a misfire while towing. So that problem had actually been resolved before I got the vehicle, and that makes me fairly confident in putting a catalytic converter on it, because that was a reaction to a previous problem. Unfortunately, I did not get this car from step one. I'm the third shop now that's worked on it since it started to have issues, but it seems like everything is pretty good. I will take it for a test drive, a little bit longer one. I'll take the scan tool with me. I'll look at some different data like long-term fuel trims. Realistically, I'm going to look at the O2 sensor data specifically on the right-hand bank, but I'll look at both. And I think that's about it. So we confirmed it, we diagnosed it, repaired it, and confirmed the repair. Yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching, and hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and I'll see you later.